Hello, and welcome to this Beyond Clean virtual conference. The speakers for today's conference, the sponsors for today's conference, and the Beyond Clean team are all so excited that you're here. If this is your first time joining us for a Beyond Clean virtual event, I want to call your attention to a couple of event functions. All of the windows on your event screen are movable. You can shrink them, you can enlarge them, you can move them, whatever you need to do to create the event feel that works best for you. In the upper right corner is a resources tool. Download conference sponsor information and the resources and links that your speakers have provided for you. On the bottom left, you will see a Q&A or question and answer tool. Any questions that you have for the speaker during each session can be submitted to them using this feature. Our speakers today will bring you a wealth of knowledge, and all of their information can be found in the speaker bio tool on the right side of your screen. Along the bottom are the icons for each of the windows as well. Clicking these will minimize and maximize each window. This will be an action-packed conference, and there will be breaks between each of the sessions. So feel free to grab a snack, check on the dogs or the kids, assemble a tray, do some jumping jacks, whatever you need to do before joining us again.
All right, thanks, Linz, and what's up, everybody? Good morning. I am Brett Norton with Beyond Clean, and we're extremely excited to have all of you back joining us for yet another Beyond Clean virtual conference. We've had a lot of great conferences so far this year. We've got more coming, so stick with us, but really excited to bring this one to you today. I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to those of you joining us for the first time. We're super excited, and hopefully you stick with us for the remainder of the year and beyond. I'd like to introduce today's conference. The title of today's conference is SP3D, Data-Driven Decisions Changing the Sterile Processing World. I would like to really thank everybody for joining forces to explore the incredible power of data in our industry, and just get ready to discover the hottest data trends our industry is buzzing about, along with data tools that will take your sterile processing career to new heights. Our all-star lineup of frontline professionals and industry change makers are joining us for a day of thought-provoking discussions featuring live Q&As during each session. So I do really encourage our audience out there to throw out some questions as they come up during the presentations. Our speakers are available live, so if we do have time during the presentation or at the end, we'll try to get to those questions because we really enjoy answering any questions that come up. I'd like to thank our event sponsor, Aesculap, for making this day of education possible. And also I'd like to thank First Case for collaborating on today's event and providing nursing credits. I do have an important CE update because things have changed a little bit, and we are now offering CEs throughout the conference today. All of today's conference sessions are individually approved for one CE for SPD. So at the conclusion of each conference session, you will find the link to access your CE certificate in the downloadable resources window. You don't have to print out the certificate. You can just download it and save it, put it in the folder. So, but that is available for at the end of each session, really important. You can access the links throughout the day and anytime on demand after the conference. If you need nursing credits, stay tuned to the conclusion of this conference and you'll be automatically directed to your nursing CE certificate. I'd like to really quickly remind everyone that since we are dealing with technology, some things do happen, video blips, audio kind of shuffles around a little bit. So if you do have any of those issues, just go ahead and refresh your browser and that should fix the issue. Got some things available in the resource window, just some ways to connect with our sponsor directly on LinkedIn. And you can also check out the latest Beyond the Tour episode featuring Aesculap. You can also follow Beyond Clean, First Case, and Power Supply on LinkedIn. We invite you to sit back, relax, and assemble that tray. It's time to get this event started. Kicking off today's conference is Marjorie Wall. Marjorie is the Associate Director of Sterile Processing at Cedars-Sinai in California. Marjorie is a dynamic and accomplished professional with a passion for excellence in healthcare leadership in the sterile processing industry. With 25 years of experience in the industry, Marjorie is a dedicated advocate for sterile processing education and best practices. The title of her presentation is Research and Data in the Sterile Processing Voice, a PhD case study. How is research revolutionizing the sterile processing industry? And Marjorie joins the conversation to share her insights on cutting-edge research currently being conducted in our industry and the potential impact these findings could have on our standards and best practices. Marjorie will also share the research she conducted during her PhD case study and the impact she hopes her findings will have on the industry we all love. So I'll stop talking. It's time to get on with the show. Without further ado, let's welcome Marjorie Wall.
Good morning. So thank you for that introduction. I am really excited to be here and share some of the research that's been going on, and specifically my own research that I've done for my PhD or for my doctorate degree. I did recently defend. I am going to share, this is going to be a little bit academic, but I'll explain it to you guys. It's going to be great, and we're going to have so much knowledge and growth about how we can help improve the adoption of disruptive innovation in healthcare, specifically in the sterile processing field. I would like to go ahead and say that I am representing myself, so everything that's shared, it represents me and not any organization that I'm affiliated with. So let's go ahead and jump in. I hope you're as excited as I am. So I'd like to start with a quick story. And there was a group of firefighters that were fighting the Man Gulch fire. So this group of firefighters were the top, like highest, best firefighters out there. They were called smoke jumpers. So these are like the SEAL team of firefighters. And when there's these crazy wildfires going on, these guys come in or dropped out of an airplane, parachuting in to fight the fire. So when this occurred for this Man Gulch fire, which is where we're going to kind of start this conversation, these firefighters came in, they had their tools, they were ready to go. They arrived about 10 a.m. They had lunch. They started walking around, getting ready to go. And what happened was the fire jumped from one side of the gulch to the other and then started coming at them over 600 feet per minute. So this fire was racing towards these, again, top tier elite firefighters. And the firefighters realized it and started running for their life. So initially, their fire captain, Dodge, he told them, drop your tools and run faster. The firefighters struggled with that. Some of them didn't drop their tools. Their tools are like, we're running from a fire. One, that's crazy. We're the elite of the elite firefighters here. Why are we running from a fire? Two, why would we drop our tools? We're running from a fire without tools. We're not even a firefighter anymore. What are we? So the firefighters didn't drop their tools. They continued running. As they got further along, this fire, which is rapidly growing and getting worse, flames were 30 foot in the air, chasing them through this gulch. And Dodge decided to burn what's called an escape fire. And this escape fire is when you burn a grass area so there's no flammable materials around you, and then you lay in that area to keep yourself safe. So he did that. Everyone looked at him like he was crazy. They all kept running. They wouldn't do it. It's not what they did. They kept running. Unfortunately, there were only 3 survivors of the 15 firemen that were there, elite firemen fighting this fire. And when we go back and look at what happened from the firefighters that shared their account after, it was really a struggle because this new endogenous shock that happened to them made it so that they couldn't run, they couldn't escape, they couldn't save their lives because they couldn't drop their tools, because they couldn't run to a purposely built fire to save their lives. So in 1996, Carl Weck studied this incident as well as a few others. And he came up with this concept called sense making. It's what happens when in an organization, we as individuals get hit with a fire or disruptive technology or some endogenous event like COVID-19 that really disrupts how we do things, how we think about things. And so what happens is people go through what's called a sense making process where they have to make sense of this new world that they live in, this new technology that's really changing how they work and who they are as professionals. So we're going to talk about that. Sterile processing people, we put out fires every day. We are, the best of the best, saving the OR, working miracles. So today we're going to talk about what happens for sterile processing people when we do get those endogenous events, specifically disruptive technology. So my research question is, how do sense givers utilize social connectedness and experiential servicing at the macro level? We're going to get into this a little bit deeper. A couple of concepts that I want you guys to be aware of is institutional work. So all of us live in institutions. You hear often people say you go to SPD, you go to one SPD. So SPDs are very different. That's true. But you also hear people often say things like, I just got this new job at this new hospital, and we're having the same problems that we had in my old hospital. Or I'm a new manager in this place, and I'm solving the same problems I solved 5 years ago. So even though every hospital is different, institutions exist, and sterile processing is a very institutionalized field where we all do work very similarly. So institutional work is where individuals are saying, I'm changing my institution, I'm changing how we work, or I'm going to maintain it or disrupt it. So it's that action for changing or maintaining an institution. So sense giving is a strategy concept. So we talked about what sense making is. Sense giving would be, in our firefighter example, that would be Dodge. That would be Dodge telling his 15 firemen, drop your tools to save your life. It's how he's communicating, it's what he's doing, and what strategic leaders in sterile processing are doing to help our employees and our teams make sense of their new reality and make sense of how this new disruptive technology is impacting their identity and how they work every day. So at the macro level, there's been very little research done in this. There have been a couple of studies, one looking at post-Katrina and how organizations talked about their ability to adopt and recover after that. There's a university social media study, which is very similar to what I'm doing here today. And then there's the Northern Rock Bank failure. And that one's particularly relevant because they did a qualitative analysis of 2,000 media articles looking at how people spoke about the crisis of that bank failure. So we're going to take what some of these studies have learned, but really look at how it is used in sterile processing rhetoric in social media. One more concept is experience effect. And I know I'm going through a lot of concepts really quickly, but you're going to see where we're leading to in just a second. So experience effects are when you do an action, when you're in an institutionalized field, institutionalized organization, when you're working in sterile processing and you have an experience where the OR calls you to the room because something happened, that changes your synapses, the actual strength and shape of your synapse in your brain. And it makes it so that you remember at a neurological level what happened. And it really ingrains that shape so that when you're in that same situation again, you're going to respond in a very similar way because it's imprinted neurologically in your brain. So we see this, everywhere. You drive to work one day, you drive to work, you go on autopilot, you drive to work even though you're trying to drive to the grocery store. So these repeated behaviors, these recency effects, things you've done more recent or more thicker synapses, really impact how you learn and how you're able to adapt or not adapt when you're faced with new disruptive environments. So I have two more concepts and then we're going to get to the fun part. So we talked about experience effects. One of the things that researchers have found that can kind of help build reflexivity to kind of manage that is experiential surfacing. So if you've ever been in a team meeting where your boss is like, we have this new thing, can you tell me what it feels like to use it? Can you share with me your experience? So it's this process of externalizing the internal experience. So if you are given a new technology and you're like, go, and you don't get a voice, you don't get to talk about it, you don't get to share it, people tend to be more resistant. They tend to go back to those deeply ingrained built synapse experiences that we talked about a second ago. When our sterile processing professionals are given the opportunity to have a voice and to share their experience with this new technology, they tend to be more reflexive, more adaptable. They may not fully adapt it the way we ask them to, but they may, because they're able to kind of go through this experiential surfacing process, they may find an even better way to use this technology and to adapt with it. So this is an important concept to understand, because we are, very rigid built creatures of habit in institutionalized fields. And if we're going to change, and I think we all know at this point we must change, we need to be able to use tools like experiential surfacing to really engage and hear our staff to make sure they're set up for success. And then sense giving. So one of the things that came out in a lot of research before I did my study was that sense giving is actually a very emotional thing. Sense receivers, so those are our staff when we're using sense giving strategically, it really involves an emotional arousal, and their cognitive thoughts are tied to this arousal. So there's a very strong emotional component. In our firefighter example, there was fear, there was anxiety, there was stress. And these things really come into play. So as you're trying to build a strategic method of using sense giving to influence our teams, influence our industry, and beyond clean, influencing the full industry through their disruptive social media presence, they really have to bring in that emotional component because it's very, very tied, very close. And then social connectedness. We are our relationships. So it's been shown over and over and over again that we're more likely to do something if we're socially connected and involved in it. So that's a key concept we're going to want to keep in mind. So with that said, those are all of our concepts, all of our terms that are really building this research study. We're going to look at how sense givers use social connectedness and experiential surfacing at the macro level. So macro level means at the industry level. We're going to say that experiential surfacing is a moderator, social connectedness is a moderator, and that there's an interaction between the two when you use them both together. Okay, so we'll skip through that. So let's talk about healthcare. And I know we're here to talk about sterile processing, but in healthcare, 2000, so this is 20 years ago, there was an announcement that 98,000 people die annually from medical errors in hospitals. When we get into more recent studies, globally, 10% of hospital patients have hospital-acquired infections, and 40% of patients in primary and outpatient care are harmed by medical errors. These are very high stats. 2019, so 2 decades from that 2000 study, there's been little improvement in the healthcare industry to implement innovation and best practices to improve patient care safety, but our costs continue to rise from 7.6 trillion to 7.8 trillion, and we know it's continuing to rise even beyond that, especially in this last year or two post-pandemic. So healthcare costs are increasing faster than the economy. And it is counterintuitive that the healthcare industry can continue to grow, continually to get more expensive, and continue to cause harm. And I just want to pause that continue to cause harm. We see that in our sterile processing field. Post-pandemic, we're all being pushed to do more, to do more, to do more. More OR volume, more complex surgical procedures with more trays and more complex instruments. I think all of us have about, I was going to be over dramatic and say 15, but like 3, 4, 5 robots, right? With very complex instructions for use. So we're all being challenged to push but we're all still, causing harm, having tray errors, having CMS events. So we're at a point where something has to change in our industry, and it's going to be innovation, it's going to be professionalization of the industry. So we have to stop the harm. In a world where the norm is pervasive, rapid changes, innovation, and instantaneous communication and connections, the healthcare industry continues to have a 17-year gap to implement evidence-based best practices into routine care. Why do we fail with adopting innovation? Okay, so we're going to dig into that. We're going to dig into it, though, focusing on sterile processing. Now we're getting to the fun part. So what I did was I looked at our industry podcast. So I downloaded, scraped all of the podcast channel content. I did that data last year ending October 15th, 2022 from HSPA Process This Podcast, which was 73 episodes. Beyond Clean, which, when you look at these stats, 73, 542 episodes compared to the other ones, which was 73, 102, 143, and 204. Beyond Clean is clearly a beast as a voice for our industry. Ask the Educator from Healthmark, which is actually personally one of my favorite podcasts, 102 episodes. Process Media, excellent podcast, 143. Knowledge and Nonsense, 204 episodes. So I used this curated list of podcasts because they really represented a spectrum of our industry. So our certification education board, our disruptive voice of the industry, one of our strong industry partners that's trying to grow education and content in the industry, some of our disruptive employees and key team members that are trying to build a new voice, and then a professional development kind of staffing agency soft skill. And they hit a lot of topics on their podcast as well. So I wanted a good cross-section, a good balance of the voice of our industry to look at how our industry leaders, those institutional work people that are trying to change and shape our industry, what language they're using to talk about innovation adoption. Because I know we can learn from them and adopt some of what they're doing in our own organizations. So to do this, I did Otter AI transcription. So all of those podcasts were transcribed. I did a Luke rhetoric analysis, and then I did SPSS statistical analysis. So it was kind of that 3-step process. This was over 1,100 episodes, but I want you to see that I analyzed almost 6 million words. So this was a lot of content, and it's so important to understand that because the more content you have, the more robust your findings are. So the findings of this research study are very solid and very valuable. So now the fun part, we started doing our hypothesis testing. These are the same research questions. I just put them there so we can remember what we're talking about. So I pulled 27 Luke dictionaries. So each of these are validated dictionaries that look at how you talk about something and what it means. So the threat dictionary can actually analyze content to predict whether or not something may be like a terrorist attack or using very threatening social media language. Creativity and Innovation is able to analyze language to predict whether or not people are talking about innovation. Crowitz Innovator, right here below that, is actually really cool. It doesn't just predict whether you're talking about innovation, it predicts whether the person talking is an innovator. So it's pretty amazing what information we can get out of these dictionaries when we're analyzing content. So we ran this Luke analysis, 27 dictionaries, almost 600 scored variables, and 40,000 segments. So let me explain what that means real quick. So I had 1,100 podcasts. Actually went back and split those to the individual speaker level. So if we're talking and we're having conversational turn taking, my first turn is a segment, your first turn is a segment, and vice versa. So we had over 40,000 segments of dialogue through all these podcasts. So with that, I pulled out these variables on the left, the rhetorical devices, which represent social connectedness and experiential surfacing. And then to look at my variable that we're trying to measure the impacts, we want to see how social connectedness impacts the sentiment of how people are talking about technology. So that's how we build these variables. So factor loading is a statistical method. I'm not going to go into it. I can if you guys have questions. But I wanted to share this for transparency about how we built these measures. So the technology sentiment score was a measure multiplying the technology index versus the positive sentiment index minus the negative sentiment index. So it's math. But that got the measure of how our industry leaders are talking about technology, whether they're talking about it in a positive or a negative light. So again, I'm going to go through this part pretty quick because it's a lot of statistics. But for the technology index, I did this factor loading. I found these 5 variables really defined. I was able to use those to build whether or not the speaker was talking about technology. So if they were talking about the internet, they were talking about science, if they were talking about technology or computers, I was able to capture that to build that technology index variable. Same thing with negative sentiment. I was able to capture negative emotion, negativity, negative tone. So all these different negativity measures to come up with a variable that really represented negative sentiment. Same thing for positive sentiment, positive emotion, positivity, positive affect, positive tone, positive emotions. So I was able to use those variables to build this positive sentiment index. So with that, I performed the math that we talked about a second ago and came up with the sentiment score. So positive sentiment minus negative sentiment gave the overall sentiment score for that segment of conversation. Multiplied that by the technology index, which gave me my very important variable, technology sentiment score. So that measure represents when, one of our industry leaders is talking, are they talking about technology positively or negatively? So that's really what that measure is representing. Then I developed my independent variables, used the same factor loading process to build measurements for experiential surfacing and social connectedness. So with experiential surfacing, I actually found 3 big things, and they kind of surprised me. So the things that were important for experiential surfacing, so this is really when you're externalizing your internal experience, empathy. So showing empathy to someone when you're speaking with them, that really enables them to better externalize their internal experience. Assertive was another factor that was identified, and it makes sense because if you're going to externalize your internal experience, you need to be a little assertive about it. And when I say assertive, I don't mean aggressive. It's not a negative connotation. It's the ability to feel comfortable speaking up and externalizing that internal experience. So it's very important to be able to be assertive. And then friendly. So and we know what friendly means. So if we're using a language environment that has empathy, has assertiveness, and it's okay for individuals to be assertive in their conversation, they feel comfortable, safe to speak up, right? And it's a friendly environment. Those are the 3 factors, 3 ways that people really feel comfortable and feel safe, externalizing their internal experience, which we know is critical for creating that safe space for people to hear and change. They need those things. Social connectedness, I actually found 5 factors that really measured whether or not we have a socially connected environment. The first one was compassionate. In order to have social connectedness, we have to have compassionate, we have to have considerate, so we have to be considerate of each other. We have to have interaction frequency. So interaction frequency means like time and frequency. So we can't just have a conversation. We have to have multiple conversations. We have to be willing to build this exchange of language and this dialogue to have time exposure to each other to build a strong socially connected environment. We have to have collaboration, okay? And this one's going to sound a little bit funky, this last one, and this one again was a very big surprise for me. We have to have confrontation. So if we're going to have a socially connected environment, we have to be able to confront and challenge each other. Still, showing empathy, still, doing all those things, but it can't just be me telling you what you want to hear. I have to be able to confront your ideals. You have to be able to confront my ideals, but still doing it in a way where we have collaboration, compassion, all of those things that build those really strong socially connected environments. So again, not a negative connotation with confrontation, but it's still an important measure in social connectedness. So these ended up being all of my factors. You can see the different hypotheses that we've already gone over. And so next comes the fun part of doing statistical analysis to see how these different variables interact to lead to the technology sentiment score. And again, what we're looking for, what we're hypothesizing is that experiential surfacing, like high experiential surfacing, is going to increase the positivity around technology. Same thing with social connectedness. High social connectedness is going to increase the positive language around technology. And then, my final hypothesis is that when you have high experiential surfacing and high social connectedness, there's going to be some magic that happens between those two concepts. And we're going to have what's called an interaction effect, which means it's going to be an even more powerful reaction that's going to lead to even more powerful technology sentiment scores. So that all of that work that we did really got to this point where we can statistically measure these concepts and see if we do have those measures in fact here. So first research question: how do sense givers utilize social connectedness and experiential servicing at the macro level? Hypothesis 1, experiential servicing is a modifier for sense giving of disruptive technology. So these concepts are, externalizing your internal experience is going to lead to improved sense giving. So that strategic language and that positive technology conversation of the disruptive technology. So what we found was that assertive and friendly had a high correlation, statistically significant, with the technology sentiment score. We did not find that empathy did. So when our industry leaders are talking about technology and they're trying to externalize that internal experience of their viewers and of their people that are on their episodes, they're using assertive, friendly language, which makes sense. They're challenging each other's ideas and getting each other to share their internal experiences. But they're actually not using a lot of empathy, which was a surprise for me. So interesting finding, but let's go on to hypothesis, or I guess we can go into this a little bit deeper. So the fact that empathy was not a finding that did not support the hypothesis 1. The fact that assertive did support it, and it makes sense because experiential surfacing is an action. So you have to have action to be assertive. So this is where individuals are taking an action to externalize their internal experience. So that positive correlation really does support the hypothesis. And then friendly. For individuals to externalize their internal environments in a safe and effective manner, it has to be a friendly environment. I mean, and think about it, this makes sense. If you're having a team meeting and you're talking to your team and you want them to speak up and you want them to share their experience so that we can all understand each other, share meaning, and grow and build a strong team that can adapt to this new technology, it needs to be a friendly environment. So this really does support that the experiential servicing is a key component of technology adoption. So that was supported. Our second hypothesis is social connectedness is a moderator of sense giving of disruptive technology. So with that factor loading, we found these 5 factors. performed what's called a linear regression, so statistics, a statistical analysis. What we found was that social connectedness factor 1 was, and that's compassionate, was statistically positive. So it does have a positive correlation to a positive technology sentiment score. Considerate had a negative correlation. So it does support it, that it does have an impact, but it's actually a negative correlation. So the less considerate you are, the more you're talking positively about technology. So that's interesting. And then the interaction frequency was also significant, but again, a negative correlation. So what that means is the more interaction frequency language you're using, the less you're talking about positive technology. So the more you're talking about negative technology, which is really interesting as well. And then collaboration, again, not a surprise here. For social connectedness, collaboration had a very strong, positive, significant response. So that what that means is when we're talking about technology, we're talking about it using really collaborative language. We're, talking very positively about the technology. And, that's likely because if we're implementing this new technology, we want to do it collaboratively. We don't want to just tell you to do something. We want to build this collaborative relationship and this collaborative conversation about this new technology, this new disruptive technology, and how it's going to really impact our day-to-day lives. Confrontation had a strong positive correlation. Again, confrontation is not a negative thing necessarily. It means we're willing to challenge each other's views. And what we're seeing here with these other measures is that as long as we're doing it in a friendly, safe way, confrontation is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. So confrontation, very important. And this brings us to the final question, is what happens when you have high experiential surfacing and high social connectedness? So we're going to go ahead and look at that. So we found that there was an interactive effect. When we had both, we found empathy actually had a negative correlation, considerate had a negative correlation, and the interaction frequency had a negative correlation. But what we found had a positive correlation. So these are things that are important for positive technology conversations, was friendly, compassionate collaboration and confrontation. Remember, for experience effects and sense giving, sense making, that emotional arousal is very important. And so we've been able to go back and show that this friendly, compassionate, collaborative environments are absolutely critical for building these safe space and these conversations to have disruptive technology adoption. Okay, so the final results are that we had mixed results for experiential surfacing impacting technology sentiment scores. And we have social connectedness that supports technology sentiment score. And then we have a interaction effect between experiential surfacing and social connectedness. So we did support all of these concepts in here. And so practitioner implications. So what does this mean to us as sterile processing professionals? So what this means is that it's important for us to understand language and how it impacts us. We've seen in the last probably 2015, 2016, we've seen this resurgence of conversations around sterile processing industry, around our field, around looking for things to change and improve and be better. We see it on Facebook from our team members that are out there asking questions, looking for help, support, engagement. We see it on LinkedIn where our leaders and our staff are in there engaging with each other, sharing their voice, looking at new technologies, looking at new concepts, looking at, some difficult conversations about even, English as a second language and some of the other hot topics out there right now. And it's important to understand that as industry leaders, as institutional workers, people that are trying to change the industry and make a difference, like Beyond Clean, um, understanding language and rhetoric devices, it's critical when you're framing your conversation. This study looked at technology and how we talk about technology, but it's critical for all of those disruptive conversations that we're having as an industry right now, that we need to understand that the language we use influences the outcome and whether people hear us and whether they're able to change because of us. It's also important to understand that macro level sense givers, they are using these concepts. That ability to externalize your internal experience is critical. You can see the wall behind me where I have all these crazy wall post-its. We do a lot of process improvement. I have my Six Sigma black belt. And anytime we're having these conversations, whether it's organizational process improvement or whether it's things like new technology adoption, we have to make safe space for our employees to share their experiences, to be able to hear us and what we're working through, and for us to be able to hear them. And by doing both, we create this nice recursive process, or this cyclical process where we can hear each other and build this new beautiful thing that neither one of us thought we were going to do to begin with. So using experiential servicing tools, using social connectedness and building relationships and understanding that our teams are people and we need to have those relationships with them are critical for having our sense makers be able to hear us. It's critical for our firemen working those front lines of fires, but it's also critical for our sterile processing staff working the front lines of our hospitals. So let's work together to see if we can kind of build more of that in our industry. So it's important for hospitals and organizations, but also firms. When we're looking at our industry, we have all of these amazing corporate companies and startups that are really trying to change and impact things. We see more people finding their voice in social media, more businesses wanting to do their own podcasts or come and visit other organizations like Beyond Clean or Healthmark, their podcasts, to really share what they're trying to bring to the industry. It's important to understand these firms when they do that they need to use language that's really going to support getting their message to the stakeholder. They need to be strategic with their choices. And then finally, strategic leaders in sterile processing and the healthcare industry, they need to understand the implications of language around disruptive technology to impact that sentiment and meaning construction at the sense maker level. So I've seen it so many times, and I know you guys have seen it too, where a new leader goes to a conference, they see this amazing technology that's going to change the way they work and solve all their problems, and then they come into the hospital and they can't get funding. They can't get their employees to use the new technology. They can't get perioperative leadership support for how it's going to impact that end user outcome. So as strategic leaders in sterile processing, we have to study these tools that are coming out of research and learn them and adapt them and find ways to leverage them to get our voices and our ideas heard, whether it's about disruptive technology or getting funding for a new process or some other disruptive change like English as a second language. So we need to, as leaders, to be open to this, read those HBR articles and do what we need to do to educate ourselves on some of these concepts. Because if we can learn how to do that, then we're going to be more effective as leaders in our organization to make the kind of change that our industry is really just hungry for right now. I know I hear conversations about this all the time at conferences and in my role at HSPA, I get a lot of that feedback from our members. So it's something important to really understand and learn. So that's the primary bit of our practitioner implications. I know we've got about 15 minutes for Q&A if we have any questions. But I would like to just jump in, Brett, if it's okay, before we do that. Our industry is changing a lot, and there's a lot of push for professionalization in the industry. We're seeing more people going to school, getting their associate degrees, getting multiple certifications, getting their bachelor degrees, getting their master's degrees. And I think we have a handful of doctors in sterile processing now. We're seeing more research. We had the one recently from Johnson & Johnson on looking at blood drying on surgical instruments and the impact of off-site reprocessing. We saw one on Da Vinci robotic arms from Australia not long ago. We've got the amazing offset studies on endoscope reprocessing and the splash studies. Dr. Droznik's done some on flexible scopes. There's all this amazing research and scientific looking at how we work in our industry. So I love that. I encourage all of you to take a look at those studies and see what's going and help us find the voice for what our future studies are going to look like. And I'm definitely open to ideas on looking at what we should look at next. So if you have ideas, please let me know. It's an exciting future we have ahead of us, and I can't wait to be a part of it with all of you guys. All right, Brett, I'll turn it back over to you.
All right. Marjorie, that was really good and very informative. It's a different way to look at how we formulate the conversation when it comes to technology. And you could, as you mentioned, you could even throw that into the workflow conversation. And, you know, your comment or I guess it's your phrase, friendly, compassionate, collaborative environments. I think I got that right. That is so true, because if people aren't able to speak up or to add their thoughts to a conversation to where a piece of technology will help improve a workflow or will help grow the overall efficiencies that are associated with sterile processing, I think it's really critical to have that type of environment. Do you have any examples of, say, without naming anybody or any type of brands out there, of a piece of technology that was a critical mover in, say, one of the departments you worked in and the conversations? You have kind of a baseline or an example of that conversation to where the audience can relate to that?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. I will say, and I definitely will answer it. One of the thoughts I had in my head, if I could just share it real quick while you were talking, is I don't want to understate the impact and the value of what all of our industry podcasters and webinar folks, including Beyond Clean, what we're doing. We're building such a strong voice and becoming, a disruptive force for change in a good way. So there's a lot of people out there trying to find their voice. I encourage you guys to continue to do that and to build it because we need it. That's how we're going to make things better. I just wanted to say that, and then I'll go back and answer your question now if you'd like.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think having those difficult conversations is the only way you move the needle, right? And
absolutely.
It's a effective way of problem solving. It's an effective way of getting people to think outside the box. And it's also a good way to encourage brainstorming. So yeah, it's, you have those tough conversations, you bring up some of the ugly side of the business, but that's what people need to see and what they need to know. Right. So
absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely. All right. So I'll jump in. So a few years ago, when it was still kind of new and novel, and in many places it still is new and novel, I was at an organization where we implemented visual recognition assembly technology. We did it through several phases. We implemented initially a data cleanse where we analyzed and cleaned up our tracking system information. We then worked on, optimization, tray optimization. There's been several actually academic publications on those, and I really suggest people look at it. I know the Virginia Mason one is a good example, but there's some more recent ones as well. So we did tray optimization. And then after tray optimization, that's where we started experimenting and having more fun. Um, and that's where we implemented the AI visual recognition assembly technology. And we started working on trying to build a system to automate preference card maintenance based on trays that people were using in the OR. So every time the OR would call for a set, and every time we would get trays back from the OR that weren't used, we would capture that data and try to build that to clean up our preference cards. So that was the technology, but that's not the interesting part, right? It was very successful. We took our tray errors through that whole process from, it was crazy numbers, like 300 a month down to near zero. We took our tray backlog from the 300s down to near zero. Our missing instrument rates were very low. Our OR delays, our IUSS, all of our stats got very favorable very quickly through that whole process. And it was like a 2-year process to get from the beginning to the end. It wasn't overnight. And it was a union environment, just to share that for transparency. So part of what made that system so successful with our implementation was when we introduced the technology to the staff, we had a team of employees that represented the crew that we met with, and we socialized it. We heard their experience. That experiential servicing is so critical in their current work environment. We heard their frustrations. We did process mapping and data work, like what's behind me, to get them to hear each other and their own frustrations, because a lot of frustrations can quickly become blame games. So we did that so we could kind of learn our system issues. And through that process, we were able to start looking at system solutions, which included technology. So we really framed all this technology work that we did as, we're not trying to replace employees. We're not trying to, say that you're not great at what you're doing. We're trying to bring in tools that are going to help support you and set you up for success. And by going through that process where we heard their voice, we heard their challenges, and then we introduced these new solutions, they were able to see the solution, kind of connect it to what they were experiencing in their challenges in their day-to-day life. And then they were able to almost play in the sandbox. We let them play with it before we implemented it. And they were able to share their experience playing with it. Before we fully went live. So that full process and that building the team and those conversations around it with all of our team members is really what led to their engagement when we implemented it. And it wasn't just engagement, it was pride. They were very proud of all the work that they did. They were very proud of the impact they made. And they were very proud of the culture that we built through that process. It was, very strong social connectedness, very good. And when I say family, I don't mean toxic family. We all say sterile processing is a family, but, very close family relationship in our team. That's really what led to the success of that program. And it's like watching a miracle unfold in front of you when you can make that kind of magic happen.
Yeah.
I've seen other leaders try to do the same thing, but not be able to have those conversations with the employees. And it usually fails. So right. You have to connect with your crew.
Yeah. And I think what I grabbed out of all of that is the collaborative effort. You talked about that. It's a collaborative environment and encouraging people to pull in their ideas and thoughts and to utilize the technology that you're trying to implement. And then obviously it's the data piece, which is the big picture that we're talking about during today's conference. But I think that also goes to the relevancy of, and building a case for bringing in the new technology. If you don't have the funding, this is what we did. And this is how we went about it, and actually having the process that everybody was involved in. So it's, as you said, it's almost like I picture it a family at a dinner table, and everybody smiling, maybe having some of the difficult discussions, And confrontation, obviously, you mentioned too, is a big part of it, but it all comes together, and that's where the magic happens. So that's a great example. I do have a question here from our friend Harry Mullen. How long did it take for you to complete your study, and what was it like to defend your dissertation?
Oh, Mr. Mullen from California. He's on that time zone like I am right now, where it's very early.
Right. Yeah, we're all three of us are up early, but but I think you beat me.
I know. So yes, so my dissertation, so it was a 3-year process from start to finish. I don't know why I was crazy and decided that it would be a good idea to start a doctorate program in the middle of the pandemic, but I did. It was such a good experience. I did take a EDBA program at a college in Silicon Valley. So my classmates were, senior partner PwC. One was an executive in the Pentagon on the Navy side. We had Bitcoin researchers, IBM, Google, diversity and inclusion specialists. So it was a really amazing group. And I will say that ability to be in a program where I was exposed to so many different mindsets and thought processes than my own, it really was mental growth expansion. Because I think in sterile processing, sometimes we have a tendency to stick with our own kind, stick with our SPD friends. And I love my SPD friends. But it was such a good experience. And so it was a 3-year process. And I am the second in my cohort to successfully defend my dissertation. So there's a whole group of people coming behind me. And my defense was, I think it was a 3-hour process. So I gave you guys a shortened version of it. Brent had me pull out, 20 slides yesterday.
It was, I think, what was it, 72 slides total? And
yeah.
I mean, you certainly could have kept them, but
I know, right? We would be here for another hour and a half. It'd be great.
Right.
So it was like an hour and a half presentation, followed by another 30, 45 minutes of very strong questions and challenges to my research. After that, I got to leave the room, and I had to wait while my committee were all talking amongst themselves about me. And then I came back into the room, and they were like, "Congratulations, Dr. Wall." And I cried. So
Awesome.
It was an amazing process. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Well, congratulations. Formally, I know I've extended it to you, and I know that everybody out in the audience says congratulations as well. So that's a great job. And, it really does highlight what you talked about at the end of the presentation as far as education is concerned, that, moving forward and not being afraid to push the gears into another level to really figure out, how you can make a real impact on the industry, because that's what this industry needs is more people like you and people that are really dedicated to the education piece. And that's why we're here as well, to encourage people to do that. One quick thing, I know we've got a couple of minutes left, but I think you talked about, is it sense giving at the beginning with the firefighter example? And could you maybe highlight something, a similar circumstance? And I think that has a lot to do with leadership, right? In sterile processing, where leadership fails in terms of, not utilizing a friendly or compassionate tactic, as you highlighted, to where that's when the rest of the wheels break down. Is there, an example you could provide for us in terms of the sterile processing world?
Sure. And we do see that a lot, especially when sometimes we have, I don't want to say language barriers, and when I say language barriers, I don't mean language barriers. I mean, when you're talking as a sterile processing person to a perioperative person, or when you're talking to a CFO, or you're talking to your team members and you've gotten a little disconnected from the team. Sometimes we see leaders go into their departments and know what the problem is and not be able to hear them, not be able to have those conversations. Similarly to the fire chief who's, starting a fire in order to save his team from the fire, right? We have sterile processing leaders that walk in and see their department on fire with backlogs and tray errors and an upset OR. So they come in with solutions on what they know will work and what they've experienced will work in other hospitals. Consultants can often fall into this trap as well. And they come in and they try to implement these processes almost turnkey, but they don't take the time to learn the people, to talk to the people, to talk to the crew, to talk to those key stakeholders and hear their experiences and build those relationships. Because without that conversation, even if you know the solution, no one's going to hear you and no one is going to change. You have to put the effort in to hear the people you're working with, to hear their experience in order to get them to hear your experience, and together through that socially connected relationship, build a solution that's going to work for the organization that you're in.
Well, I think that that's probably the absolute perfect way to end this presentation and discussion. So, Marjorie, I want to thank you once again for joining us, and I'm going to say it once again, congratulations. It's great that you're doing what you're doing, and good luck to you. I know you're moving forward and starting with Harvard this fall, so that's awesome stuff. So if anybody out there would like to reach out to Marjorie directly, her information is on the right side of your pane up and on your screen. So please feel free to reach out to her via LinkedIn, and I'm sure she'd be more than happy to answer your questions. But we're at time. We've got another one coming at you, a full day of presentations and panel discussions. And Marjorie, thanks again. And if anybody has any questions in regards to CEs, just remember that at the very end of this session, you will see in the top right corner in the downloaded resources tool, a link for your CE. Nursing credits will be available at the end of today's conference. And once again, I'm Brett. I'll be right back with you in a few minutes, but thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you soon.